For 65-year-old Angela, it should have been a quiet morning in her new home, watching furniture delivery men assemble her dining room set. That's when a small black boy appeared at her door, trembling and clutching a mysterious shoebox in his hands. It seemed like a simple case of a lost child, the kind elderly folks in quiet neighborhoods know how to handle with a gentle word and a phone call to parents. But what Angela would discover inside that shoebox would transform her peaceful retirement into a nightmare she never could have imagined. Comment below where you're watching from today. And if you like this shocking story, don't forget to subscribe. The quiet spring morning dawned over a peaceful residential neighborhood. Inside her new house, Angela, a 65-year-old widow, methodically vacuumed the wooden floors. The persistent drone of the machine filled every corner of the mostly empty space, providing a rhythmic backdrop to her racing thoughts. Today was a big day. 3 scheduled deliveries were on their way: furniture, electronics, and the moving company's arrival with her remaining belongings. Angela had only moved in 4 days ago, and everything still felt foreign to her. The house, a generous gift from her eldest son Howard, sat just blocks away from his own home. It was a gesture of love and support, but it came with mixed emotions for Angela. Most of her personal belongings, clothes, cherished items, and daily necessities remained stored at her second son Jerry's house in another town, awaiting the moving company's arrival. As she cleaned, memories of her troubled relationship with Jerry surfaced. His reckless lifestyle had caused constant strain in their relationship. He had a habit of stealing her cash savings whenever he needed money, was rarely home, and frequently brought different women to the house. One particular incident with his girlfriends had severely embarrassed Angela in front of her church prayer group community, damaging her standing among fellow worshippers. It was this event that ultimately led to her decision to move away from living with her second son. While Angela was grateful for Howard's financial success that enabled him to buy her this house, she harbored quiet sadness about the living arrangements. She strongly suspected her daughter-in-law's influence in having her live separately rather than with them. While she understood the need for space in modern families, the arrangement left her feeling somewhat isolated, despite the physical proximity to Howard's family. As she continued her cleaning, Angela's mind drifted to the stark differences between her sons. Howard's stability and success contrasted sharply with Jerry's chaos and irresponsibility. She sighed, pushing away the complicated emotions and focusing on the tasks at hand. The pending deliveries created a mix of excitement and nervousness within her. Angela had meticulously prepared the house for the new furniture and electronics, hoping to establish a sense of home in this unfamiliar space. She paused her vacuuming, looking around the empty rooms, imagining how they would soon be filled with new possessions and, hopefully, a sense of belonging. As the morning wore on, Angela's anticipation grew. She found herself frequently glancing out the window, watching for the delivery trucks. The quiet neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the day to unfold. The sudden rumble of a large delivery truck pulling into Angela's driveway broke the morning's quiet, momentarily interrupting her cleaning routine. She set aside the vacuum cleaner and hurried to the window, watching as 2 technicians emerged from the vehicle. They were professionally dressed, carrying clipboards, and exuded an air of efficiency that both impressed and slightly intimidated Angela. As she opened the front door to greet them, the men began unloading multiple boxes containing an unassembled dining set, coffee table, and shoe cabinet. Within minutes, her living room was filled with cardboard and packing materials, transforming the empty space into a maze of boxes and protective wrapping. Angela, aware that Howard had paid extra for assembly service, immediately let the men set to work inside after she closed the door. The sound of metal parts clanging against each other and tools being used filled the house, creating a symphony of construction that Angela found oddly comforting. Their efficiency and focus demonstrated their experience as they transformed individual pieces into functional furniture before her eyes. As Angela oversaw the assembly process, her focus was abruptly broken by a strange noise from outside. Distinct, muffled screams cut through the air, sending a chill down her spine. They seemed to be coming from a neighboring house, the unsettling sound impossible to ignore. Concerned, she turned to the technicians, ready to ask if they had heard it too. To her surprise, they appeared entirely unaware, their attention consumed by the rhythmic hum and clang of the assembly work around them. "Did you hear that?" Angela asked hesitantly, her voice barely audible over the noise of their work. One of the technicians looked up, a questioning expression on his face. "Hear what, ma'am?" Angela paused, listening intently, but the screams had subsided. I thought I heard screaming from outside." The technician shrugged, returning to his task. "Probably just kids playing, ma'am. Nothing to worry about." But Angela couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. The screams hadn't sounded like children at play. There had been a desperation in them that set her nerves on edge. Excusing herself, she carefully indicated to the workers where each piece should be placed once completed, then stepped out onto her porch. The quiet neighborhood seemed unchanged, peaceful even. But as Angela stood there, straining her ears, another sound reached her, this time the distinct noise of items breaking. The crash echoed through the air, followed by muffled shouting that she couldn't quite make out. Driven by concern and a growing sense of unease, Angela decided to investigate. She crossed the street to the house directly opposite hers, the source of the disturbing sounds. As she approached, she could hear more muffled noises from within, but her knocks went unanswered. She lingered by the windows, trying to peer inside, but saw no movement or lights. The house appeared deserted despite the noises that had drawn her there. Feeling conflicted and slightly foolish, Angela returned to her own house. She found the furniture assembly completed, the dining table and chairs perfectly arranged. One technician was working on the shoe cabinet, while another positioned the coffee table in front of the couch. Their professional efficiency provided a momentary distraction from her concerns about the neighboring house. As the technicians finished their work, they asked Angela to sign the delivery documents. She did so with a distracted air, her mind still partially focused on the strange occurrences across the street. The men packed up their tools, and soon the sound of their truck pulling away broke the renewed silence. Angela stood in her living room, surrounded by her new furniture, feeling a mix of satisfaction at the progress in making her house a home and lingering unease about what she had heard. As she ran her hand along the smooth surface of the dining table, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong in her new neighborhood. Angela was carefully examining the newly assembled furniture for any defects when a soft knock at her door broke the quiet. Puzzled, she made her way to the entrance, wondering who it could be. As she opened the door, she found herself face to face with a young black boy, no older than 12. Tears streamed down his face, his small frame trembling as he uttered the chilling words, "Mommy is dying, please help." The raw fear in his voice sent a wave of concern through Angela. She opened her mouth to respond, to offer comfort or ask for more information, but before she could form the words, the moment was shattered by a commanding voice cutting through the air. "Jaden!" Angela looked up to see a man emerging abruptly from the house she had investigated earlier. His voice brooked no disobedience, and the effect on the boy was immediate. Jaden's body visibly tensed at the sound of his name, his eyes widening with unmistakable fear. The man's presence created an immediate atmosphere of tension. His intimidating glare seemed to freeze Angela in place, making her acutely aware of her vulnerability. Something in his demeanor suggested barely contained violence, causing her to remain motionless on her doorstep. The boy, responding to his father's call, turned and ran back across the street without another word, leaving Angela standing there, stunned and confused. As the man and boy disappeared inside their house, slamming the door behind them, Angela finally found the courage to move. She retreated into her home, hands trembling as she locked the door. "That's one scary man," she muttered under her breath, trying to calm her racing heart while weighing her options. Angela paced her living room, debating whether to call the police. Her mind raced between concern for the boy and fear of creating problems in her new neighborhood. The possibility that she might be overreacting or misinterpreting a family situation made her hesitate. Her natural inclination to help warred with her desire to avoid conflict, especially as a newcomer to the area. She sat heavily on her new couch, the events of the last few minutes replaying in her mind. The boy's tearful plea, the man's intimidating presence, the palpable fear in the air. It all pointed to something deeply wrong. But what could she do? She was new here, alone, and unsure of the dynamics at play. Should she trust her instincts and intervene, potentially putting herself at risk? Or should she mind her own business, potentially leaving a child in danger? The weight of the decision pressed down on her, a burden she never expected to bear in her years. Unable to shake her unease, Angela reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keypad for a moment before she dialed Howard's number. As the phone rang, she rehearsed in her mind how to broach the subject without sounding alarmist. "Hello, Mum?" Howard's voice came through, sounding slightly distracted. "Howard, dear," Angela began, trying to keep her tone light. "I just wanted to update you about the furniture delivery. Everything's here and set up nicely." "That's great. I'm glad it all worked out," Howard replied, his voice warming slightly. "I'm still waiting, though, for the electronic and the moving company to arrive. It's been hours into the morning." She said. "Well," Howard began hesitantly, "let me check their tracking app. 1 second." There was a brief pause, the sound of his fingers tapping on his phone filling the silence. "Mum, the truck delivering your electronics is on its way. They should be here any minute now." Angela paused, then carefully steered the conversation toward her concerns. "Howard, I was wondering, is this generally a safe neighborhood? Have you heard of any issues around here?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Howard responded, his tone casually dismissive. "Mum, it's one of the safest areas in town. Why do you ask? Is something wrong?" Angela hesitated, unsure how to explain her fears without sounding paranoid. "Well, I heard some screaming earlier, from the house across the street. And then a little boy came to my door saying his mother was—" She paused. The words failed to escape her mouth. "It was unsettling." Howard's sigh was audible through the phone. "Mom, you're just not used to the new surroundings yet. The house probably just lacks soul for now. Give it time. As for the screams, it's probably just typical domestic quarrels. You know how kids can be, always dramatic about everything." His dismissive tone didn't escape Angela's notice, and she felt a twinge of frustration. But Howard, the boy seemed genuinely scared, and the man who came for him, he was quite intimidating. "Look, Mom," Howard said, his tone taking on a slightly patronizing edge. "I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. You shouldn't meddle in their affairs. Just let it be as long as they're not endangering you or the house. Remember, I'm just a few blocks away. If anything truly concerning happens, you can always call me." Angela felt her concerns being brushed aside, left unaddressed. "Yes, of course." "Thank you, Howard," she replied, trying to mask her disappointment. As she ended the call, Angela felt more isolated than ever. The conversation had done little to allay her fears, and Howard's dismissive attitude only added to her sense of unease. She was about to retreat to the couch when the sound of another truck pulling up outside caught her attention. Looking out the window, she saw it was the second delivery, the electronics. Unlike the friendly furniture delivery men, these couriers maintained a more businesslike demeanor. They efficiently unloaded multiple boxes, a 2-door refrigerator, laundry washing machine, dishwasher, and CCTV equipment. Angela directed the placement of each appliance, the refrigerator in the kitchen, dishwasher near the kitchen counters, washing machine in the laundry room. When questioned about the CCTV placement, she requested installations at both the front and backyards, hoping the security cameras might provide some peace of mind. As she supervised the CCTV installation, movement across the street caught her eye. There, in the second-floor window of the house she had investigated earlier, was Jaden. The boy's intense gaze locked with hers, and she watched in growing horror as he deliberately traced letters on the glass, HELP. Following the message, he pounded silently on the window, his actions clearly meant to convey desperation without making noise. Angela's heart raced as she witnessed this silent plea for help. But before she could react, Jayden disappeared from the window, leaving her with a sinking feeling in her stomach and a growing certainty that something was terribly wrong in the house across the street. The presence of the delivery men on their ladders, working on the CCTV installation, gave Angela a sudden burst of courage. She smoothed her dress and hair nervously, her fingers betraying her anxiety as she made the decision to approach the neighbor's house again. Each step felt heavier than the last as she crossed the street, her heart pounding with both fear and concern. As she reached the front door, Angela took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever might come next. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could make contact with the wood, the door swung open. The same intimidating man from earlier filled the doorframe, his presence even more imposing up close. He wore a white tank top that showed signs of struggle, loose rims and crumpled fabric, as if someone had pulled at it. His eyes bored into Angela as she struggled to maintain her composure. "Can I help you?" His voice was low, carrying an undercurrent of threat despite the polite words. Angela swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I heard screaming earlier. And your son, he came to my door saying his mother was dying. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right." The man's demeanor shifted subtly at her words. A smile that didn't quite reach his eyes spread across his face. "Ah, I see. I'm Corey, by the way. I'm sorry for any disturbance. You see, my wife, she just has a bit of a fever." "Jayden, well, he's young and very attached to his mother. He tends to catastrophize situations. It's not the first time." Angela nodded slowly, not entirely convinced. Corey seemed to sense her skepticism and continued, his voice taking on a practiced smoothness that seemed both reassuring and somehow false. "We actually took Jayden to a child psychologist about 3 months ago," Corey explained, leaning against the doorframe in a casual manner that felt calculated. "He was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. It can lead to some emotional outbursts. Sometimes he damages property during these episodes, which might explain the breaking sounds you heard." The detailed medical explanation seemed to work on Angela, her unease fading as she accepted his reasoning. She even apologized for making him go to such lengths to clarify. Angela nodded sympathetically. "I'm so sorry to hear that. It must be challenging for your family." Corey's manner became artificially friendly. "No problem at all. You're new to the area, so I understand your concern." "Thank you. You're new to the neighborhood, aren't you? I noticed the moving trucks." Angela nodded. "Yes, my son Howard bought me this house. He lives just blocks away. A 5-minute walk, actually." At the mention of Howard's proximity, Corey's expression noticeably darkened for a split second before he quickly masked the change. Angela noticed it, and her heart rate quickened at this telling reaction. She tried to brush it off, reminding herself of the young boy's medical condition and how this man must be tired taking care of the house with his wife's being sick at the moment. "Well," Corey said, his tone carrying a hint of finality, "I hope we can be peaceful neighbors. It's always good to have understanding people nearby, especially with Jayden's condition." As he prepared to close the door, Corey's last words carried an undercurrent of threat despite their surface politeness. "Let's hope we won't have any more misunderstandings, shall we?" The door closed with a soft click, leaving Angela standing on the porch, her mind reeling from the encounter. As she walked back to her house, she tried to rationalize her fears, telling herself not to overthink the situation. But deep down she knew that something was just not fit in with the man and the house. As Angela returned to her front yard, she was met by an impatient courier complaining about her absence. "Ma'am, we've been waiting here for you. We need your signature to complete the installation," he said, his voice tinged with annoyance. "I'm so sorry, I got carried away." Angela apologized, flustered by the confrontation with Corey, and now the courier's irritation. She quickly scribbled her signature on the form he thrust towards her. The courier and his partner wasted no time packing up their equipment and departing. As they left, Angela overheard their grumbled complaints about old people needing to talk to everyone and not knowing when to stop. Their remarks stung, but she chose to ignore them. Soon she was left alone with her newly installed appliances and CCTV system. The rumble of the trucks faded into the quiet afternoon air, leaving behind a heavy silence. Angela stood in her living room, surrounded by the new electronics and the scattered debris from the installations. The CCTV cameras were mounted, but their functionality remained a mystery to her. On the coffee table lay a stack of instruction manuals, their technical jargon a daunting challenge. With a sigh, Angela picked up the booklets and settled onto her new couch. She opened the CCTV instructions first, determined to figure out how to operate the system that might provide some security in this increasingly unsettling situation. As her eyes scanned the pages, however, the technical terms seemed to swim and float across her vision. No matter how hard she concentrated, the words refused to form coherent meaning. Frustration built within her as she flipped from page to page, each diagram and explanation more confusing than the last. Finally, Angela closed the booklet with a snap, tossing it onto the coffee table. "Why can't I understand this?" she muttered, angry tears pricking at her eyes. "I'm not smart enough. I've never been smart enough." Her mind drifted to the past, to the painful memories of her struggles after her husband walked out, calling her a dependent woman who can't do anything right on her own. Those words had haunted her, fueling her fight to carve out a place in a world that seemed determined to undermine her. Whenever she searched for the root of her insecurities, one memory stood out vividly: the day her father, a fish market vendor, had pulled her out of school. "School is a waste of money," he had said firmly, his voice gruff with conviction. "Working a real job makes money for a living." From that moment, she found herself behind the counter of their seafood stall, her dreams of education slipping away with every sale she made. The weight of those words still lingered, shaping her insecurities and fueling her determination to prove she was more than what others believed. Angela closed her eyes, trying to push away the painful memories. She forced herself to find silver linings, focusing on Howard, her successful son. His achievements should be reason enough to be thankful, she told herself, but the contrast between his education and her own limitations weighed heavily on her heart. She didn't want to be another burden on his life, but she just couldn't help the loneliness she felt inside. Seeking support, Angela reached for her phone once more, dialing Howard's number. To her disappointment, it was her daughter-in-law who answered, her voice carrying barely concealed impatience. "Angela, is everything all right?" "I'm sorry to bother you," Angela began hesitantly. "I'm having trouble with the CCTV system. I was hoping Howard might be able to help." There was a sigh on the other end of the line. "Have you tried reading the manual, Angela? Howard's busy in the garage right now and I need to feed the baby. I'm sure you can figure it out." Before Angela could respond, the call ended abruptly, leaving her feeling sadder and more isolated than ever. She considered walking to Howard's house, but remembered she needed to stay home for the moving company. As the late morning sun streamed through her windows, Angela found herself surrounded by new possessions that she couldn't fully utilize, in a house that didn't quite feel like home, and with a growing sense of unease about her neighbors. The technical manuals mocked her from the coffee table, a tangible reminder of her perceived inadequacies. She moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The house across the way stood silent, its windows dark. What was happening behind those walls? Was she overreacting, or was there really something sinister at play? Angela's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at her door. Her heart rate quickened. She glanced at the window, but there's no truck or van parking in her driveway. As she approached the door, a sense of foreboding washed over her. Angela's hand trembled slightly as she opened the door. To her surprise, she found Jaden standing on her doorstep once again, but this time his appearance was drastically different. The boy's small frame was shirtless, wearing only pants, and he clutched a red shoebox in his trembling hands. "Please save sister," Jaden pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, ma'am." Before Angela could fully process his words, the boy thrust the shoebox towards her. With shaking hands, she lifted the lid, and her breath caught in her throat. Inside, carefully wrapped in what she recognized as Jaden's missing shirt, was a newborn baby girl. For a moment, Angela stood frozen, her mind struggling to comprehend the situation. Then, her maternal instincts kicked in with full force. She quickly pulled both children inside, closing the door behind them. "Jaden, sweetheart," Angela said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the panic rising within her. "Can you tell me what's happening? Where did you find the baby?" But before the boy could find his voice to explain, the relative quiet shattered. Screams erupted from the neighbor's house, more intense than before. The terrifying blend of a woman's and man's voices now carried clearly through the air, sending chills down Angela's spine. The newborn, disturbed by the commotion, began stirring and crying in the shoebox. The sound alarmed both Jaden and Angela, their fear palpable as they realized the noise might attract attention. Angela's worst fears materialized as she glanced out her window. Corey was pacing alone toward her house, his front door closed behind him. In his hand he clutched a baseball bat, his purposeful stride leaving no doubt about his intentions. "Jaden, listen to me," Angela said urgently, her mind racing. "I need you to hide somewhere in the house. Take your sister with you. Can you do that for me?" The boy nodded, his eyes wide with fear. He scooped up the shoebox containing the newborn and ran deeper into the house, disappearing from view. Angela's hands shook as she fumbled with the door lock, ensuring it was locked. Then, with trembling fingers, she dialed 911, knowing time was of the essence. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around Angela. "Please, I need help," Angela whispered urgently. "There's a man coming to my house with a baseball bat. I have 2 children here who I think are in danger from him." As she gave her address to the operator and ended the call, thunderous knocking erupted at her door. Corey's voice boomed through the wood, sending shivers down Angela's spine. I know Jaden's in there. Open this door now or I'll break it down." The relative quiet of the neighborhood was shattered by the thunderous knocking at Angela's door. Corey's voice boomed through the wood, each word dripping with barely contained rage. "I know Jaden's in there. I saw you take him in," Corey shouted, punctuating his words with menacing thuds of the baseball bat against the door. "Open up now, or I'll call the police and report you for kidnapping." Angela's heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled back from the front door, her mind racing with fear. The man's furious thumps against the door echoed through the house, each one sharper than the last. "Yes, I swear if you don't let me in right now, I'll swing this bat through your window," he threatened, his voice carrying a casual malice that sent chills down Angela's spine. With trembling fingers, Angela repeatedly dialed Howard's number while waiting for the police to arrive. Each unanswered call increased her sense of isolation and vulnerability. The constant banging on her door provided a terrifying backdrop to her attempts to reach help, while somewhere in the house, Jaden remained hidden with the infant whose life she now felt responsible for protecting. "Please, Howard," Angela whispered as she dialed his number for the 5th time. "Please pick up." But the call went straight to voicemail once again. Angela fought back tears of frustration and fear. She had never felt so alone, so helpless. The weight of responsibility for the 2 children pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. Outside, Corey's threats grew more specific and terrifying. "You don't know who you're dealing with, old woman. I'll make you regret the day you moved into this neighborhood." As the minutes ticked by, feeling like hours, Angela found herself trapped in a nightmare she could never have imagined. Her quiet retirement had transformed into a life-or-death situation, with the lives of 2 innocent children hanging in the balance. She silently prayed for the police to arrive quickly, knowing that every second could make the difference between safety and tragedy. Just as the situation seemed ready to spiral completely out of control, Angela saw Corey raise his arm, a bat poised to strike. Before he could act, the wail of police sirens pierced the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. The sound grew louder as patrol cars pulled up in front of Angela's house, their flashing lights casting ominous shadows across the yard. The effect on Corey was immediate and startling. His aggressive stance faltered and he hesitated, glancing toward the approaching cars. The anger in his expression wavered, replaced by a flicker of fear and uncertainty. The menacing man with the baseball bat transformed before Angela's eyes into someone playing the role of a concerned father. "Thank God you're here," Corey shouted to the approaching officers, his voice filled with feigned relief. "That woman kidnapped my son. He's in there with her." Angela watched this transformation with a mix of disbelief and fear. She knew the truth, but would the police believe her over Corey's act? As the officers quickly assessed the situation, one approached Corey while another knocked firmly on Angela's door. "Ma'am, this is the police. We need you to open the door." With shaking hands, Angela moved to unlock the door. As it swung open, she found herself face to face with two stern-looking officers. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice trembling. "I can explain everything." The police entered Angela's home, taking in the disorder of her living room. The scattered delivery debris created a telling scene. Furniture boxes, electronic packaging, and styrofoam peanuts littering the floor painted a clear picture of her recent move. "Ma'am, we've received conflicting reports about what's happening here," one officer said. "Can you tell us your side of the story?" Angela took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I just moved in a few days ago," she began, gesturing to the boxes and new furniture. "This afternoon, the boy from across the street, Jaden, came to my door. He was terrified, saying his mother was dying. Later, he came back with a newborn baby in a shoebox, begging me to help. That's when the man outside started threatening me with a baseball bat." The officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of concern and skepticism at the two conflicting stories told by Corey and Angela. "And where are the children now?" one asked. "They're hiding somewhere in the house," Angela replied, realizing she didn't know their exact location. "I told the boy to hide when I saw Corey coming." The officers began a thorough search of the house, calling out for Jaden. Corey trailed behind and Angela followed them, her anxiety growing with each empty room they encountered. Finally, the sound of infant cries guided them to an empty room, where they discovered the closet hiding both children. Corey, still gripping the baseball bat, immediately launched to the boy. "Oh, Jaden, come to Daddy, you're safe." "No!" the boy shouted. "No, no, go away!" The police watched the scene erupted. Corey, noticing concerns and questions in their eyes, jumped into his story, his voice smooth and convincing. "Officers, I can explain everything. Jaden has autism spectrum disorder. We had him diagnosed just 3 months ago. He tends to run away and make up stories. I was just planning to play some baseball with him when he took off." When the police officers asked about the shoebox, Corey's eyes narrowed at it. "I have no idea where that baby came from. That woman. He must have lured Jaden in here somehow with that baby." Angela felt her heart sink as she watched the officers' expressions. They seemed to be buying Corey's story, and she realized how the situation must look from their perspective. A confused old woman, new to the neighborhood with 2 children who weren't hers. One of the officers, the bigger one, asked Jaden to pass the baby in the box to him to secure her, and the boy complied. But then, a crucial detail flashed in Angela's mind. "The CCTV cameras," she exclaimed. "I just had them installed today. They should have recorded everything." The officers looked intrigued by this new information. "Do you know how to access the footage?" one asked. Angela's face fell. I don't. There's a manual, but I couldn't figure it out." Despite her embarrassment, Angela's suggestion to check the footage seemed to shift the dynamic in the room. The officers asked her to show them where the CCTV system was set up. In the living room, one officer worked to connect the CCTV to Angela's TV, while the other one with the baby kept a watchful eye on both Corey and Angela. As the footage began to play, the truth of the day's events unfolded before their eyes. Angela's earlier visit to Corey's house, their conversation, her return home, the departure of the electronics installers, and finally, Jaden's arrival with the shoebox and Angela pulling him inside to safety. When pushed to explain why she pulled the boy inside so quickly, Angela revealed the presence of the newborn in the box. The officer's demeanor changed noticeably as they watched the video evidence. They turned to Corey, their expressions hardening. "Sir, would you care to explain this?" Corey's composure began to crack. His smooth demeanor faltered, replaced by a growing look of desperation. "That doesn't prove anything," he snarled. "The boy is confused. He doesn't know what he's doing." But Jayden, seemingly emboldened by the presence of the police and the video evidence, finally found his voice. "He's not my real dad," the boy said quietly, his words cutting through the tension in the room. "He's my stepdad." All eyes turned to Jayden as he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Mom and Corey were always fighting about the baby. He didn't want her to keep it." The officers listened intently as Jayden described the ongoing tensions in the house. His words painted a picture of a household filled with fear and violence, culminating in the events of that morning. "After Mom had the baby," Jayden said, his voice cracking with emotion, "Corey tried to kill her. Mom was hurting from having the baby, but she fought him. I grabbed my sister and put her in the shoebox, then I ran to hide her." The room fell silent as the weight of Jayden's words sank in. The officers exchanged grim looks, clearly reassessing the situation. Angela felt a mix of relief that the truth was finally coming out and horror at what these children had endured. But just as it seemed the situation was stabilizing, Corey's composure shattered completely. With a sudden burst of rage, he swung the baseball bat, striking one of the officers in the head. The officer crumpled to the ground, unconscious and bleeding. In the frozen tension that followed, Angela's eyes locked onto the shoebox containing the newborn. It had slipped from the officer's grasp during the chaos and was now tumbling through the air. Time seemed to slow as she watched the box's trajectory, her heart lurching with fear. Without hesitation, Angela lunged forward, her hands closing around the shoebox just before it hit the ground. She cradled the fragile container, her breath catching as she ensured the infant inside was unharmed. The sudden instinctive movement caught Corey's attention. His eyes darted toward Angela, and in a split second chaos erupted in the room. The remaining officer reached for his gun, but Corey was faster. He snatched Jayden, using the boy as a human shield. "Nobody move!" Corey shouted, his voice trembling with desperation. "I'll hurt him if anyone tries anything." He gripped the baseball bat tightly, raising it threateningly over the boy, poised to strike at any moment. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone froze, their eyes fixed on Corey and the terrified child in his grasp. As Corey edged toward freedom, the officer strategically controlled the situation, calling for backup and paramedics, while specifically mentioning one officer was injured. His voice was calm but urgent as he spoke into his radio. "Officer down at 1542 Maple Street. Suspect attempting to flee with a child hostage. Requesting immediate backup and medical assistance." Corey continued his retreat, dragging a terrified Jayden with him, his grip on the baseball bat never wavering. The boy's whimpers filled the air, a heartbreaking soundtrack to the unfolding drama. Angela watched from the doorway, her heart pounding, feeling helpless as the child she had tried to protect was now in grave danger. "Corey, think about what you're doing," the officer called out, his gun still trained on the pair but unable to take a clear shot. "This isn't going to end well for you. Let the boy go and we can talk this through." But Corey seemed beyond reason, his eyes wild with desperation. "Stay back," he shouted, tightening his grip on Jayden. "I'll hurt him if you come any closer." The tension in the air was palpable as Corey inched closer to the street, his eyes darting around for an escape route. The officer maintained his position, trying to keep Corey talking while waiting for backup to arrive. Just as Corey reached what he believed was his moment of escape, fate intervened in the form of the delayed moving company truck. The large vehicle, arriving late for its scheduled delivery, turned onto the street with a speed, its driver unaware of the drama unfolding. Time seemed to slow down as the truck approached. Corey, distracted by the officer and his own desperation, failed to notice the vehicle until it was too late. In a horrifying moment, the truck struck both Corey and Jayden as they attempted to flee. The impact was sudden and violent. Corey and Jayden were thrown to the ground, the baseball bat clattering away on the pavement. The truck driver slammed on the brakes, the screech of tires adding to the chaos. The sudden turn of events transformed the scene into utter pandemonium. Angela, driven by instinct, rushed out of the house with the newborn on her chest, towards Jayden, her heart in her throat. The officer sprinted towards the fallen pair, calling urgently into his radio for the paramedics to hurry. As Angela reached Jayden, she fell to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his small body, afraid to move him. "Jayden, boy, can you hear me?" she called, her voice choked with fear. The boy's eyes fluttered open, a small groan escaping his lips. Relief washed over Angela as she realized he was conscious. "Don't move," she soothed, gently stroking his hair. "Help is coming." Nearby, Corey lay motionless, the officer checking his pulse while keeping his weapon ready. The truck driver had emerged from his vehicle, his face pale with shock as he took in the scene before him. Within minutes, the quiet street was filled with the wail of sirens as multiple police cars and ambulances arrived. Paramedics swarmed the scene, quickly assessing both Jayden and Corey. To everyone's relief, an initial assessment revealed a small mercy amidst the chaos. Jayden had sustained only minor injuries from the ordeal. A paramedic gently placed him on a stretcher, securing him with care. Angela stayed by his side, holding his small hand tightly and murmuring words of comfort to soothe him. Corey, however, remained unconscious and required immediate medical attention. A different group of paramedics worked efficiently, stabilizing him before loading him into a separate ambulance. The injured officer from inside the house was also carefully brought out and tended to. His colleagues watched with concern as he was placed in an ambulance, the severity of his head injury still unknown. "Jayden, you're safe now," Angela whispered, brushing his hair back gently. "They're taking you to the hospital to make sure you're okay." As the paramedics prepared to transport him, Jayden turned his tear-streaked face toward one of the officers. "My mum," he said, his voice trembling but urgent. "She's still in the house. Please, you have to check on her. She wasn't okay when I left her." The officer exchanged a glance with his team, nodding grimly. "We'll find her, Jayden," he said firmly, signaling for 2 officers and a medic to enter the house opposite of Angela's place. Moments later, the responders re-emerged, their faces etched with somber determination. They carried Jayden's mother on a stretcher, her frail body barely visible beneath a white blanket stained with blood. Angela's heart sank as she saw the medics working frantically to stabilize the woman. "She's alive," one of the medics reported, though his tone was grim. "But she's lost a lot of blood. We need to move quickly." Jayden's cries filled the air as he reached out desperately toward the stretcher. Mum, wake up," he sobbed, his small frame trembling with fear and grief. Angela crouched down beside him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders in a steadying embrace. "They're going to take care of her, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "The doctors will do everything they can." The paramedics loaded both Jayden and his mother into separate ambulances, the sirens wailing as they sped off into the distance. Angela watched, her heart heavy yet hopeful, praying that the chaos of this night would finally give way to healing for both mother and child. As the ambulances departed, their sirens cutting through the morning air, the scene transformed from a residential crisis into an active crime scene. Additional officers arrived, quickly taking control of the situation. They began cordoning off the area with yellow tape, documenting evidence, and taking statements from witnesses. The truck driver and his assistant, initially terrified by the accident and its aftermath, received reassurance from the officers. "You didn't do anything wrong," one officer explained gently. "In fact, your arrival may have helped us apprehend a dangerous criminal and save a child." As the chaos began to settle, Angela found herself standing in the middle of the street, feeling overwhelmed by the morning's events. She watched as officers carefully collected the baseball bat, photographing it before placing it in an evidence bag. One of the officers approached Angela, his expression kind but professional. "Ma'am, you might want to come down to the hospital with us to give a full statement along with the boy. I'm sure he wants to stay close with her sister. We'll also need to contact child services regarding the infant." Angela nodded, realizing that the baby is still in her arms. "Of course, officer," she said quietly. her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions within her. "I'll go to the hospital and do whatever is needed to help. As for the baby, I'll cooperate with child services and provide any information they need." She glanced toward the ambulance where Jaden sat, his tear-streaked face peeking out. "Right now, I just want to make sure those kids are okay." The emergency room of the local hospital was a flurry of activity as Angela arrived with the 2 backup officers and the baby. The sterile smell and bustling atmosphere were a stark contrast to the quiet neighborhood she had left behind. Jaden, having been brought in for a thorough checkup, clung tightly to Angela's hand, his eyes wide and fearful as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. One of the officers, a kind-faced woman named Officer Chen, stayed with them as they were led to a private examination room. "The doctors will be here soon to check on Jaden," she explained. "A representative from Child Services is on their way too." Angela settled into a chair, cradling the newborn in her arms, while Jaden sat on the examination table, his legs dangling nervously. The events of the morning felt surreal, like a dream she couldn't quite shake off. As she looked at the frightened boy and the sleeping infant, she felt a fierce protectiveness well up inside her. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Shifting the baby carefully, she managed to pull it out, seeing Howard's name on the screen. With a mixture of relief and apprehension, she answered. "Mom?" Howard's voice was filled with concern. "I just got your messages. I'm so sorry I didn't answer. Are you okay? What happened?" Angela took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Howard, I'm at the hospital. Something big happened this morning. The children from across the street. They needed help. It's a long story." As she recounted the morning's events, from Jaden's first appearance at her door to the dramatic confrontation with Corey, she could hear Howard's sharp intake of breath. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. "Mom, I don't know what to say. Are you all right? Do you need me to come down there?" Angela looked at Jaden, listening to her conversation with wide eyes, and then at the sleeping newborn in her arms. In that moment, she made a decision that would change all their lives. "Yes, Howard. I think you should come down here, please." As she ended the call, a doctor entered the room, accompanied by a woman in a smart business suit. "Mrs. Chen," the doctor said, "I'm Dr. Roberts, and this is Ms. Thompson from Child Services. We must discuss Jaden's condition and the situation with both children." Over the next hour, Dr. Roberts examined Jaden, confirming that his injuries from the accident were indeed minor. However, as he spoke with Jaden, a troubling picture began to emerge of the boy's home life and the events leading up to that morning. Ms. Thompson took notes, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. Finally, she turned to Angela. "Mrs. Chen, given your involvement this morning, I'd like to hear your perspective on the situation." Angela carefully recounted her experiences, from Jaden's plea for help to the confrontation with Corey. She could see Ms. Thompson's expression soften as she spoke, moving from professional detachment to genuine concern. Just as Angela finished her account, a nurse entered the room, her face grave. She whispered something to Dr. Roberts, whose expression immediately fell. He turned to the group, his voice somber. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news," he said. "We've just received word about Jaden's mother. Despite the medical team's best efforts, she didn't make it. The injuries she sustained were too severe." The room fell silent, the weight of the news settling heavily on everyone. Jaden, who had been quiet throughout the examination, suddenly burst into tears. Angela immediately moved to his side, wrapping her arms around him as he sobbed. Miss Thompson cleared her throat, her voice gentle as she addressed the room. "This changes things significantly. With Jaden's mother deceased and his stepfather in custody, we need to consider immediate placement options for both children." Angela, still holding the crying Jaden, felt a surge of determination. She looked up at Miss Thompson, her decision made. "I'd like to apply to foster Jaden and his sister," she said firmly, "at least temporarily, until a more permanent solution can be found." Ms. Thompson's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's a big commitment. Are you sure you've thought this through? Before Angela could respond, the door opened, and Howard rushed in. His eyes widened as he took in the scene, his mother, comforting a crying boy while holding a newborn baby. "Mum?" he said, his voice filled with confusion and concern. Angela looked up at her son, her expression a mixture of sorrow and determination. "Howard, I'm glad you're here. There's something important we need to discuss." As Howard settled into a chair, his eyes darting between his mother, the children, and the professionals in the room, Angela began to explain the situation. She spoke of the morning's events, of the tragedy that had unfolded, and of the immediate connection she felt with Jaden and his newborn sister. "I know it sounds sudden," Angela said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "But these children have just lost their mother. They need a safe place, and I need a purpose. I think we could help each other." Howard listened in stunned silence, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. When Angela finished, he turned to Ms. Thompson. "Is this even possible? My mother just moved to the neighborhood, and she's not exactly young, and she's retired." Ms. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "It's not a typical situation, certainly, but given the circumstances and Mrs. Chen's actions today, we would definitely consider her application. Of course, there would be a thorough vetting process, home visits, and ongoing support and monitoring." As the adults discussed the practicalities, Jaden, who had calmed somewhat, suddenly spoke up. "Can we really stay with Angela?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. "She made us feel safe." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the young boy. At that moment, Angela felt a surge of determination. She looked at Howard, silently pleading for his support. Howard ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply. Then, to Angela's surprise and relief, he nodded. "If this is what you really want, Mom, I'll support you. I'll help provide stable finance for you and the kids, and in any other way I can." Ms. Thompson smiled, making a note in her file. "Well, that certainly strengthens the application. Mr. Chen, your support will be crucial in this process." Over the next hour, they discussed the details of fostering, the legal requirements, the support systems available, and the challenges they might face. As they talked, Angela felt a growing sense of purpose and excitement. The empty house that had seemed so lonely that morning now held the promise of becoming a true home. As the meeting wound down, Ms. Thompson stood gathering her papers. "I'll submit this application right away. Given the urgent nature of the situation, we'll try to expedite the process. In the meantime, we'll need to keep the children here at the hospital for observation." Angela's heart sank at the thought of leaving the children, but she understood the necessity. She hugged Jaden tightly, promising to return soon, and placed a gentle kiss on the baby's forehead before handing her to a nurse. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Howard placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, are you sure about this? It's going to change your whole life." Angela looked up at her son, a small smile playing on her lips despite the tears in her eyes. "Howard, this morning I thought my life was over. I felt old, useless, and alone, but now I feel more alive than I have in years. These children need me, and I need them." Howard nodded, a look of understanding and respect in his eyes. "Okay, Mom, let's do this together." As they stepped out of the hospital into the bright afternoon sunlight, Angela felt a mix of emotions, sorrow for the tragedy that had occurred, but also a sense of hope and purpose she hadn't experienced in years. The quiet retirement she had envisioned had vanished, replaced by the promise of a new adventure. She thought about the empty house waiting for her, soon to be filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Her perceived limitations, her age, her incomplete education, her recent relocation, no longer seemed like obstacles but rather experiences that had prepared her for this moment. As they drove home, Angela and Howard began to plan. They discussed turning the spare room into a nursery, child-proofing the house, and all the myriad details that come with preparing for a family. With each plan they made, Angela felt more certain that she had made the right decision. The day that had started with furniture deliveries and feelings of inadequacy had transformed into something far more significant, the beginning of an unexpected but welcome new chapter in their lives. Angela's quick thinking and protective instincts had not only saved 2 young lives but also given her own life renewed purpose and meaning. As they pulled up to her house, Angela paused for a moment, looking at the quiet street where so much had happened that morning. She took a deep breath, feeling a strength and determination she hadn't known she possessed. Her new life, it seemed, was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, Angela couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring.